Good afternoon and welcome back, everybody, to Word on the Street Live. We are here in the J Street offices, having made it through snow and ice and sleet and freezing rain. It was quite the week here, and we're glad to be in the office and able to have a conversation this afternoon with a good friend of J Street's and a really important figure on the national scene today in terms of the issues that we work on. Mayor Daniel Biss of Evanston, Illinois, and Daniel is running for Jan Schakowsky's seat, and we're gonna have a lot to talk about. And we're gonna get started in a moment with Mayor Biss, who's here with us. And I also want to just note this is the first time I think that we have had on Word on the Street an endorsed candidate of J Street PAC. And for some people who are watching this video and then listening later, may not know about J Street PAC. So I just want to take a second and mention that J Street has a federal political action committee. It's a candidate PAC, jstreetpac.org. We endorse now over 75% of the Democrats in the United States Senate, over 55%, almost 60% of the Democrats in the U.S. House, probably 150 to 180 candidates in this cycle, I would imagine. And every contribution that you make to a federal candidate can do double duty by putting that contribution through the J Street PAC portal. The money goes directly to Daniel Biss or to other endorsed candidates, and it is in your name. So as the donor, the candidate knows it came from you, but it also accrues to J Street PAC's total. And so we last cycle raised $15 million for candidates, which is a really important message into the political system.
Yeah, I mean, the message is basically that there is power and financial support and enthusiasm behind this. And I'll say, Jeremy, that was actually like probably much more useful than talking about blue shirts or quarter
Right.
zips.
Did you change? You weren't wearing a blue shirt earlier today. I swear to God, he was not wearing a blue shirt earlier today.
It might have been a sweater when I came in.
Right.
It was cold. Yeah. It is cold. Right. It's a little. It's the whole situation is a little rough.
But yes, the J Street PAC is a little bit more useful to the world than the blue shirt discussions. We are getting ready for an actual conversation now with Mayor Daniel Biss of Evanston, Illinois. Really, as we mentioned, a important congressional race, which is the race to succeed my dear friend and your friend and J Street's friend, Jan Schakowsky, who's one of the most wonderful people in the U.S. Congress. And please hit the heart button, like the conversation. We are increasing and growing our following on Substack every week. It's really exciting. And so welcome to Word on the Street Live, Daniel Biss. It's great to have you.
It's so good to be here. Thank you. Thanks for all that you do. And thanks for having me.
And for a number of the folks that are watching this, I'm sure you are well known, but there's probably a few people across the United States who have not yet had the chance to learn about Daniel Biss. And so we wanted to give you a chance to just tell a little bit about your personal story, your personal background, your connection to these issues that J Street is concerned about.
Yeah, well, thank you. I certainly have no illusions of being a broadly known national figure. So I'll just say a word of introduction. As you said, my name is Daniel Biss. I'm the mayor here in Evanston, Illinois. It's a community of about 75,000 people, a suburb just north of Chicago, a diverse, progressive college town. Northwestern University is here. Before I was mayor, I was a state legislator in Springfield for 8 years, working on a variety of issues from retirement security to reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, civil rights, and more. And before that, I was a math professor. So kind of an unusual transition. We can talk later if you're interested about what brought about that surprising turn in my life. But to your question about my biography, I come by my connection to J Street through a life of deep connection. My mother's Israeli. Her parents were survivors. When they came back to the Transylvanian city where they were born after liberation, they were married, and my mom was born in September 46. In 48, the three of them went to Israel, and by the early 60s, her whole extended family was there. Most of them are still there, though she's in the States now as a dual citizen. My parents still visit Israel all the time at an apartment that they have at the address where my mom grew up in Herzliya. And I used to spend every summer there as a kid. So my connection to Israel is deep, and my commitment to Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland for our people is very, very deep. And no less deep is the Jewish values that I was raised with of justice, of equal dignity and sacred value of every life, of self-determination. And so, as committed as I am to a thriving Israel, I'm revolted by the conduct of the Netanyahu government. Certainly, the violence and the collective punishment of starvation that's occurred in Gaza since October 7th, but really, frankly, far beyond that, the settlement expansion and violation of international law and U.S. policy, the condoning of settler violence, and so I've always longed for a political home that is simultaneously and with equal passion committed to a secure Israel and a secure Palestine, real self-determination for both peoples, true justice and dignity and peace and security for all. And it's interesting because I think that position is pretty well reflected among the electorate, but it's been, prior to J Street's existence, quite unreflected in the political landscape, particularly in Washington. And so it's been really remarkable to see the growth of J Street and the role that it now plays in American politics and American governance.
I got to say, the way I hear you say that, Daniel, it just very much resonates with me personally. Like we were just talking before we started about my role on the presidential campaign, and what I always tell people is the reason I ended up at J Street afterwards is because the loudest voices are either let's support Bibi no matter what, and then the other crowd that was people who were protesting on October 8th, but overwhelming majority of voters you actually talk to when you're talking to American Jews, like when they think about it, I really believe that they talk about it exactly the way you just did, and so it's refreshing to hear somebody just connecting that way,
And it's just so funny to every time that I get a chance to chat with you, Daniel, I find out a little bit more about your personal background, and I did not know that you spent the summers in Herzliya. And as I was growing up as a kid, which was probably, a good solid couple of decades before you were doing this, but my family too spent every summer in Herzliya. We were at the Hotel Sharon on the beach, and that was our like home away from home. And we, we're in Herzliya probably, from the day, the year after the 6-Day War. We went back almost every single year for the next decade. And so a very large part of my childhood is associated in my mind with summers in Herzliya. So that's very funny. And then I saw also that you studied Hebrew at Ulpan Akiva, and I studied at Ulpan Akiva as well. So we have a lot going on there together.
Wow. Yeah. I tried to take a year off between college and grad school to study linguistics in Israel, which sort of was a flop for reasons that are not relevant to this conversation, but it's a funny story. And I kicked off that year with a month in Ulpan Akiva, which was, I grew up, I spoke Hebrew with my grandmother, and it was functional, but let's say my reading wasn't so hot. So the Ulpan was helpful for that.
Yeah, for sure. So Daniel, maybe let's transition a little bit from you and tell us a little bit about your district, the race you are currently running. How do things look?
Well, so the district is it's the 9th district. It's a city and suburban district. So it's a big chunk of it is the north side of the city of Chicago, but I would say a small majority of it is suburbs, starting in Evanston and going out well into the other counties, even further out from Chicago. It's a progressive district. It's a Democratic district. It's been represented by Jan Schakowsky this is her 14th term. It'll be 28 years. Her predecessor, Sid Yates, served for 48 years. And so there's this long legacy of real progressive stalwarts. And Jan has been, just a remarkable leader, a really iconic figure in the community on a variety of different issues, but certainly including J Street's issues, where she was, kind of there from the beginning as one of the key allies, creating space for Jewish members of Congress to be supportive of this vision of Israel and peace as being both of pivotal importance. The campaign is insane. We are 48 days from Election Day. March 17th is primary day here in Illinois. We're down to 15 candidates. So we have 15 people on the ballot, and our election system in Illinois is whoever gets the most votes wins, whether that person has 52% or 22% or even 12%. Obviously, in a field that big, not all the candidates have been equally successful so far. But it really feels like three of us are kind of at the top. According to the polling, I've been in the strongest position, which obviously I appreciate a lot and don't read too much into. The candidate who's in second place is named Kat Abou-Ghazaleh. She's a very young influencer who moved to Illinois relatively recently and almost immediately began running against Jan, and obviously stayed in the race when Jan made a decision not to run for re-election. And I would say that she's been a little bit hard to pin down on what exactly her positions are on some of these issues, but she's certainly indicated, I would say, a posture that doesn't seem consistent with the idea that Israel ought to exist as a Jewish democratic and secure state. And then the other candidate who I would say is in third place is a woman by the name of Laura Fine, who is a state legislator and has really embraced AIPAC with both arms and has kind of become the AIPAC candidate in this race. And we're already seeing significant funds coming into the district, largely from out-of-state AIPAC affiliated donors. And so it's become a really stark contrast on J Street's issues and on a variety of other issues. And we feel good. We feel, I was recently endorsed by Jan Schakowsky, which is politically enormous and frankly, personally for me as a human being, really powerful and moving. And I have a lot of other exciting support and things are going well, but it's a complicated, strange, volatile field and a really complex time, obviously. And so we're going to be working night and day between now and March 17th.
And I want to explore a little bit. We're going to really dive into this because obviously this is the central purpose of having this conversation about the AIPAC dynamics and the Israel dynamics. But, give me a sense as a local politician who is spending day in and day out talking to real people, put aside the donors, put aside the media or, online clamor. To what extent do issues that relate to Israel really come up in your day-to-day interactions with the voters in your district? I mean, your district actually has a fair-sized Jewish population, so I'm sure there are people who care about these things. But to what extent is this a live issue on the campaign trail for you?
The blunt answer is not that much. It certainly comes up, but if you look at what's happening in the country right now, and if you think about how much of a brutal attack that Evanston in particular and the Chicago area more broadly were under with ICE and Border Patrol throughout the fall, not going through quite the deranged nightmare that Minneapolis is experiencing now, but really still very bad. The questions on most voters' minds are fundamentally, what are you going to do about this? Who do we most trust to fight back effectively against Trump and authoritarianism and the bigotry and racism and violence that's on display in our streets? And then the secondary set of questions, which are sort of 1B only, is how are you going to fix the economy? How are you going to deal with these fundamental questions? People being priced out of homes, people not being able to afford to start a family because of the cost of childcare, healthcare costs going through the roof because of just the kind of malicious whims of Republicans and their unwillingness to address the Obamacare subsidies. These are the issues that I hear about most often. Of course, the question of foreign affairs in general and Middle East in general and Israel and Palestine and Gaza and in particular are important to many people, and they come up, and the views on those topics in this district are extraordinarily diverse, all over the map, from people well to AIPAC's right to people well to J Street's left. And so, the issue is complex, and I try to approach it with an open posture and a willingness to listen and interface with anybody, but also a clear grounding in where I stand and why.
So I know that Elon's going to want to dive into that a little bit. I'm just going to do a quick commercial break here because we want to make sure that everybody watching is aware that J Street has our national convention coming up on February 28th to March 3rd here in Washington, D.C. It's going to be a great opportunity to dig into all the issues that we're discussing now with Daniel Biss. And it is the politics of 2026. It's the future of our country, the future of democracy, America's place in the world. And then it's what is happening in Israel. And this is an election year in Israel, too. And the war, we're thankful, so thankful, the last hostage remains have returned back to Israel in the last 24, 48 hours. And that chapter, that piece of this puzzle is closed. And we've got a lot to discuss about where we're headed. And all of that will be in play at the J Street National Convention. So please do register at the link that we just put into the chat at jstreet.org/convention and use the code WOTS for 20% off. And so, Daniel, I don't think you're going to have time to join the convention. You're going to be busy campaigning, but hopefully when you do win, that we will see you as a member of Congress at next year's convention. So let me turn it over to Elon.
That sounds like an excellent plan.
Exactly.
I told you to that one.
Exactly. All right.
That you can count on.
No, and Daniel, I will just say the way you're describing and talking about, not surprising to hear voters have other things on their minds first and foremost. And that was true last year. I think it's reflective in the polling. It's reflective even of, American Jews. This is pretty far down the list. But at the same time, I do think there is this kind of resonance that maybe wasn't there before the war in Gaza, where it comes up more, or the way you talk about the issue says more about you broadly. Are you part of the Washington establishment? Are you, kind of just off on the far left? Where do you land on that? Kind of it's a bigger judgment piece that then voters kind of try to, based on what you say, and also sometimes some candidates try to use really to distinguish themselves, right? I mean, and I'm interested to hear, dealing with this dynamic. You started to talk about it before, but interested to hear more just about how you're approaching the issue, and also how you're approaching kind of the one thing when we talk to candidates, it's always coming up, whether it should be coming up this high on the list or not. It's always, what are you going to do about, security assistance and arms sales to Israel? So interested to get your take on that and how you deal with that question.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is honestly very painful because, the way I kind of laid out who I am and talked about my dedication to what Israel means to the Jewish people and my dedication to a just and humanitarian resolution that treats all people with equal dignity. I'm not prepared to choose between those two priorities, nor should anybody be open to choosing between those two priorities. And yet my interpretation, Elon, of your question is, hey, isn't it the case that a lot of the political forces out there are kind of trying to ask you to pick one or the other? Are you for Israel or are you for justice? And I just think that's a false choice and a dangerous choice and fundamentally an unacceptable choice. And so what I've tried to do in this campaign, consistent with my values as a human being, is push out those impulses and reject those entreaties and just say, listen, here is who I am and here's what I stand for. And you're absolutely right. The question of military aid has emerged as a clear red line. And just, to be even more direct than you, AIPAC looms as a key actor in U.S. politics these days, including, even though most of their funding is not from people who align with Democrats, including in Democratic primaries. And it seems to me, if I'm understanding things correctly, that their red line is, would you support any conditioning of U.S. military aid to Israel at all? And it seems to me that the answer to that question has to be yes, irrespective of Israel, irrespective of the specific circumstances there now, irrespective of the importance of the relationship. The notion of completely unconditional military aid, a blank check without exceptions, is silly and is inconsistent with basic principles of foreign policy. But the effort that they've undertaken is to say there will be serious political consequences for any candidate that doesn't kind of repeat that incantation. So I've been unwilling to repeat that incantation. I support, as I said, Israel's right to exist, but also its right to defend itself. I support appropriate U.S. military aid consistent with U.S. law, particularly for defensive weapons, right, like Iron Dome. But I also support the Block the Bombs resolution, which places a particular list of offensive weapons that have been really egregiously misused in Gaza in a category where there's extra hurdles that would need to be cleared to transfer those. And I think that's an appropriate and sound policy. But the political landscape has made that sort of over the line for certainly AIPAC.
And then, of course, to be for any security assistance for Israel is over the line for other people on the other side of the debate. And so, the positioning that you're trying to stake out, which is this, the middle ground has a bad reputation, but I am firmly planted myself in the middle on so many of these issues. And the word that you're looking for in a lot of what you're saying is the word "and," right? You're taking away this notion that there has to be a choice between your commitment to Israel and your commitment to justice, or your commitment to security and your commitment to oversight. All of these things have to be ands. And I think that is precisely where J Street lands. And I think it's very much what you're saying here. So we got to get beyond this binary.
Yeah, no, I exactly that, and we certainly, I think, need to, for many reasons, get beyond this sort of idea that, of course, you don't have, and I think most people don't have, but some do have, that what it means to support Israel is to unquestioningly, without oversight, without condition, support military aid to Israel. I think that's a very, very bad public policy for the U.S. to have relative to any country at all. And I also just think, practically speaking, if your goal is to build out a majority coalition in this country, that position is not going to do it. And
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I often think about, I've been making the case lately, like, it would be good for Israel if we treated it, when it comes to these kinds of things, like a normal country, which what happens when we have normal allies, close partners, friends. We will agree on a lot of things, and on those we should work together. And when we disagree, like, we go our separate ways on something. It doesn't mean we give you a bunch of weapons to necessarily execute a policy that we fundamentally disagree with. Like, that's a normal thing with any country in the world, including very close allies. And frankly, I think it would be good for Israel too, and just healthy for everyone involved to have that instead of the mantra and the kind of almost like dogma associated with support.
And we've talked a little bit in this before, that a piece of this that I think has been so abnormal has been the subsidy that the United States is providing, the financial subsidy. You can have a whole military to military relationship, a security relationship with any country in the world, and it's going to have laws and regulations and limits and arms sales and all the rest of it. But I think what has made this relationship so difficult is the provision of so much money, for almost $4 billion a year of taxpayer subsidies to a first world economy. And what's so interesting is that about 10 days ago, the Prime Minister of Israel said, in a relatively under the radar way, it's time to phase that out. And then Lindsey Graham, of all people, came along and said, well, not only are we going to phase it out over, let's say, the next decade, we're going to do it even faster. And so I found that very interesting, Daniel, that suddenly this thing, which was the red line for AIPAC and for, Israel supporters in this country, you cannot question the provision of $4 billion a year to Israel, or else you're anti-Israel. Suddenly it's the Prime Minister of Israel who is saying we need to zero this out.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to be clear that it's still the red line for AIPAC. They have not gotten the memo yet, or at least if they have, they don't seem to be acting that way. But no, I think I found the piece that you wrote on this really, really helpful and clarifying. Look, the idea that there should be unconditional U.S. military aid to Israel is probably very helpful to Israel if it's an uncontroversial thing that's just going to happen anyway. But as soon as it becomes a political hot button, as soon as there's scrutiny to the question of should there be unconditional military aid to any country, the position collapses and it becomes a vulnerability. It becomes an issue where they're all of a sudden going to be eventually on the losing side. And so it was probably, as unfortunately is not uncommon, a pretty canny political move by Netanyahu to kind of, so to speak, take the issue off the table. And also just recognizing, as you said, Israel's a very affluent, prosperous country. And it's probably just not worth the trouble to endure all of the political heartburn that it would take to continue getting this level of U.S. military aid, given that they could afford to do it themselves.
So I think when you get to Congress, it's going to be interesting because it'll be a different dynamic if we start to see this not be, the ask on AIPAC lobby days, please pass the $4 billion. It'll be an interesting dynamic, but it does raise for me, I do want to dig in a little bit more on the AIPAC role in your race. You just wrote recently on your Substack about your experience with them, and that they had come to you, talked about what it would take to get support. And can you share a little bit, I think, with the viewers here, what that process is like? Because this happens in 435 districts around the country, 100 Senate races. What you experienced is what every single person running for federal office experiences in the United States on these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an elaborate, process that you undergo with a variety of different organizations, not just AIPAC, but an hour ago we announced that I was endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters and Natural Resources Defense Council, and there's also something that has an elaborate process. But so yeah, I had a series of discussions with representatives of AIPAC where I laid out what I believe, and they laid out what they would have preferred that I believe. They asked me to send them a paper, so I sent that to them, which is published on my Substack as well. I certainly have no secrets on this front. I didn't ask for their endorsement. I didn't want their endorsement or their support. My hope actually was they would just stay out of our race altogether, which I think would be better for the world, and I wish they would do that in more places. But they at some point kind of came to me and indicated, maybe we might want to support you. You just have to change this and this and this position. And I, of course, wasn't willing to do that, and that was the end of that. But it's the decision that I made to just share all that is one that most candidates don't make. And so for candidates that do have AIPAC's support, it's sort of unclear what they said or wrote to get that support. What private commitments have they made? And so they're supporting a different candidate in this race, Laura Fine, and she hasn't published her position paper. I think it's very clear, including from some comments she made at a candidate forum, that she would oppose any conditioning of military aid to Israel, but she hasn't put that on her website or published it in a place that it's clearly laid out. And so what you have is these behind the scenes conversations, the outcome of which is multi-million-dollar campaign spending decisions, where by the way, the expenditure of that money is also usually kind of hard to follow in the following sense. It's often done by a super PAC that's not called AIPAC, it's called something else. And the issues they communicate about have nothing to do with AIPAC's issues. In fact, I think they're basically always domestic issues. And right now in New Jersey, they're attacking a candidate with a kind of a laughable accusation relative to ICE. And so you have this multi-step thing where there's these conversations that, with the exception of me, most of those conversations are not actually publicly disclosed, where commitments are made that are certainly not publicly disclosed. And then the outcome is just an avalanche of money that can completely transform the way these races work. And it's just not a good way to run a democracy. It's not good for the outcomes. It's not good for actually having robust, honest, transparent discussions on the issue. It's not good for bridge building. And it's not good for having policies that are actually consistent with what the people of this country would like to see.
And that's true on every issue, right? I mean, we have such a broken politics when it comes to the role of corporate money and billionaire money and super PACs. And this is true on every issue. On this issue, what's triply disturbing is that the source of the money in the super PACs that AIPAC does run are Republican donors. And that's public record. Right? I'm not speculating. I'm not saying something that is a libelous charge. The donors are reported, and the donors' political giving is reported. So you can look and see who the donors are, and you can look and see how they donate their money. And then that money is spent in Democratic primaries to drive a wedge in the Democratic Party. And that's, I think it's triply bad. It's bad for Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship when this issue is turned into a partisan wedge. It is bad for the American Jewish community when this issue is used to blow up the Democratic Party. And then others look at the Jewish community and say, why are you doing this to our party? And it's not good for the long term for the state of Israel and for its relationships with the United States. So, I think it's very important to bring this out into the open. Not only does the super PAC work this way, but then AIPAC itself, in Laura Fine's case, she's not even listed on their website, right? And they use mechanisms to raise money that don't require that be public. They have secret pages for the fundraisers that they hold in their board members' homes that allow the money to flow through without actually reporting that it's coming through AIPAC.
Yeah, and this has really. Go ahead, Dan.
All right. So you mentioned, you were describing at the very beginning of our discussion, when you were talking about the way people can give to candidates through J Street, and what you were essentially explaining is, hey, if you go to the J Street PAC webpage and say, I want to support Daniel Biss through J Street, when I file my filings with the federal government, it says this contribution came through J Street. By the way, this isn't a legal thing, but if you go to my website, it says, hey, Daniel Biss is endorsed by J Street. What you believe in and what I believe in is there should be clarity and transparency about who's supporting whom and why. We've gone through this bizarre dance in this race where Laura was simultaneously flying around the country to a series of fundraisers organized by AIPAC, hosted by the board president of AIPAC, and then also kind of saying, oh, well, I'm not soliciting endorsements from any of these organizations. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a ridiculous charade, but it's illustrating something very important, which is that they are trying to achieve something that everyone knows and everyone acknowledges is not what the district wants. And so to be able to do that, they have to hide what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that's just no way to run a democracy.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, it just did not used to be this way, right? 15, 20 years ago, you might have had more Democratic donors. There might have been more transparency in some, at least candidates were willing to actually publicly take their endorsement from AIPAC. But that's just not the case in the Democratic Party anymore. I mean, largely, a lot of different reasons. As Netanyahu has moved right, as AIPAC has moved with him. Add to that the war in Gaza, and also add to that January 6th and the fact that they were endorsing a lot of these different candidates who were January 6th deniers. All of that just really drove this wedge within the Democratic Party to the point where you have to actually hide your endorsement of, and hide the money that you are getting, which is, as you said, just not the way we should be running elections in democracy. We did want to shift, Daniel, actually, and spend some time talking also about, what is the issue voters care the most about right now, right? Which is, at least in the moment, immigration, ICE, and some of the terrible things that are happening in Minnesota. But you've also experienced as the mayor of Evanston in Chicago. So how have you had to deal with that over the past few months?
Yeah, it's hard to explain. I think people now have seen it in Minneapolis in ways that maybe have broken through, but it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived in a place that's been treated like this, how much it completely transformed everyone's life. And to give an example, it's not the most important example, but it's an illustration of the universality of it. On Halloween in Evanston, which is a beautiful fall day, when ICE was all over town, when their helicopters were flying low to spot which lawns had yard workers in them so they could radio down to the ground and the SUV could roll up on the lawn and just tackle the landscape worker and drag him into the SUV and kidnap him and take him away on the assumption that all landscape workers are undocumented. We had this going on all day that day. It was actually the first day that Greg Bovino was in our town. Well, that day, in this town of 75,000 people, our school district of, I think, 7,000-ish kids, every one of them had indoor recess. Every first grader in Evanston had to come home from school that day and ask their parents, why wasn't it safe to play outside today? And the answer was, because your government was here. Because your government was here. We had as they appear to have forced a car accident that day and then essentially started assaulting, I wouldn't even call them protesters, just dissenters, people who are around and disagreeing, really violently assaulting people. So it was an unbelievable, there's no way to say it without saying we felt like an occupied community, and the occupiers were our own government. And so in the face of that, two things happened. One is the city government under my leadership did everything we could to keep people safe, creating ICE-free zones. We passed a strong welcoming city ordinance that protected city data from being used by federal civil immigration enforcement. And by the way, the license plate reader cameras we were using were operated by a vendor we didn't trust not to share that data with federal immigration enforcement. So we took down the cameras. The vendor came back and put them back up against our will. And so we had to go and put opaque bags over them so they weren't able to photograph our residents and weaponize our own data against our residents. We have our police supervisors come to the scene if ICE is in town. And when they caused that car accident on Halloween, we did a regular accident report, which means we have their driver's license with their name and license number, and those are public documents that are released under the Freedom of Information Act. And so now there's investigative reporting into who these agents are. It's the first step toward accountability. So we as a city government have been doing absolutely everything we possibly could to be the tip of the spear of fighting back and protecting our residents. But the most beautiful thing that happened was that the community rose up, and not hundreds, but thousands of people did so many different things, creating school patrols to walk kids to and from school at the beginning and the end of the day, creating rapid response networks to arrive on the scene and document and bear witness, and in some cases create enough of a commotion that ICE went on and moved elsewhere. There's been really, really remarkable work done, and it's created this new sense of solidarity. But the evil, the pure evil, the gratuitous brutality of these attacks were really something jarring. And I have to say, given how we started our conversation, I've been thinking about my Auschwitz survivor grandmother all the time in this context, all the time. Most prominently because of the way she talked to me about how she didn't believe the stories she was told about what was going on across Europe until it was too late. By the time she actually knew those stories were true, there was no freedom of movement, and she and her siblings and parents were all deported in the spring of 44. And so I think we are in a very, very, very scary, dangerous time. And it's been my deeply felt moral responsibility to do absolutely everything I can as mayor to stand up for my community, to fight back, to keep my community safe. But that drives this campaign. It drives why I'm so motivated to be successful and go to Washington and end this nightmare.
Yeah, and what you've just said, I think, speaks so eloquently on behalf of everybody in J Street. And I think people ask, why is J Street an organization that was founded to provide political support for diplomacy in the Middle East? Why are we active on these issues? We're active on these issues because how can you not be active? If you are a Jewish political organization that is rooted in the values of our community, and this is happening, how can you not use your political voice, your political access, anything that you have gathered in terms of political power to try to do something about this? And so J Street, is very engaged in coalition work and in speaking out and providing support on these issues. The title of what we're, using for our little campaign is "We Know Where This Goes," right? And we know what happens when armed thugs sent by a government start descending on your streets and asking for your papers based on your ethnicity or how you look, right? That we know that all too well as a community. And so you've really captured, I think, the spirit on this.
Yeah, and it's also got this connection to some of the things that are happening in the West Bank that we were talking about yesterday, right? I mean, I don't know if you saw the video. I know you're out running a campaign every day in the suburbs of Chicago, so you might not have seen this, but some really terrible videos yesterday coming out of Masafriyada, a village and community in the southern West Bank, with just some horrible images of settler violence, houses being burned, communities being attacked, which is just a common phenomenon now. But it's the same thing. I see, again, thugs walking into a community, terrorizing it, while the government in some cases kind of stands aside, in other cases enables it, and in other cases it is the government. And that connection with what's happening here, with the fact that this is Holocaust Remembrance Week, or day, was just, I think, yesterday. These things there's a relationship.
Yeah, there's absolutely a relationship. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's deeply connected. And I think, at the core, what's happening in this country right now is just fundamentally incompatible with having a democracy. You can't have masked men anonymously performing state violence without accountability. That's no longer a democratic society. And so it's shocking and it's wrong and you see the consequences, and that in and of itself should be enough. But I just want to emphasize this. This is at the very root of what makes a democracy function and what makes a democracy continue to exist. And we are watching something unbelievably dangerous happen.
And, you're running for Congress. Congress has the power of the purse. We're coming up to a funding deadline this week. And the question in front of the Senate is, are they just going to write another check to Homeland Security to fund ICE without any new, constraints and limits and guidelines based on what they're seeing on their TV screens as they sit in their office ready to walk over to the Capitol to cast their vote? And so this is very, very real. And you are running for office in order to be a voice and a force to stop this. And we as an organization exist to provide a political vehicle and power for people who share our values to say into the system, we will not stand by quietly while this goes on. And there are, again, organizations in the Jewish community that have more membership and more money and more power than J Street. And I continue to be amazed by the silence of too many organizations, established organizations in the American Jewish community. It's been great to see the number of rabbis that are out on the streets in Minneapolis and leading the charge and getting arrested. We're going to have a conversation about that next week on Word on the Street with a couple of rabbis who've been out on the streets doing this, and that's great. But the institutions of our community, there's a conference of presidents of major American Jewish organizations. I would think that the conference of presidents of major American Jewish organizations should have an emergency meeting in order to make it clear that the Jewish community is horrified by what is going on. And we want to put our voice out there as saying this will not happen on our watch while we are a force in this country.
Yeah. And also just making the point that we are not one issue voters. We are not one issue organizations, right? Like this is, you can't ignore all the other terrible things and just say, well, I care about security assistance for Israel. That is not how this works. That's not how the American Jewish community thinks.
And it shouldn't. Right. Even if it were, we should try to change that. And we don't have to, because that's not how they work. Well, listen, Daniel, we're coming up towards the end of the conversation here. I just want to ask folks, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please do like the conversation, give us a heart, have those hearts flowing on Substack so we get more people to get to know our content. Join us every week. Word on the Street live, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern. You can also visit our Substack page, our YouTube channel. You can visit a whole range of different social media platforms and find this content and other great content. And it's been great to have Daniel Biss here. I'll also, as we're heading towards the end, remind folks, if you found Daniel to be the kind of inspiring leader that you would like to see in Congress, please do visit jstreetpac.org and visit the Daniel Biss page. Make a contribution, help him out as he is going to be facing, I am sure, in these last 48 days, a pretty solid onslaught of money coming against you. So listen, as we're wrapping up, Daniel, I want to give you the final word here to just sort of share with us and share with those who are watching, what is your closing argument, right? What is your the core of your campaign and what you're hoping to bring to Washington, D.C. Come January next year?
Well, let me then end where I usually, if you were to have put me in a living room in my district on an evening in front of an audience of 30 or 50 people, as I am most nights.
Regularly, I hope.
Here's where I would have started. We are living in a really unique moment, as we just discussed, with unbelievable danger and unbelievably high stakes. And in my opinion, there are two qualities that we absolutely need in a member of Congress. The first is the ability to make things happen in government with backbone, with courage, with moral clarity, with the ability to withstand opposition and a willingness to do what's right in the face of political risk. I've done that throughout my career. I'm proud of the work I've done. Again, I've been a state and local official, so I can't point to foreign policy achievements in my past. But I think even just in the last year in the city of Evanston, when we passed our healthy buildings ordinance, the strongest climate ordinance doing electrification of large buildings of any municipality in the Midwest by far. And we did it against the opposition of the strongest, wealthiest, most powerful organizations in Evanston who thought they had us beaten, but we fought back and built a coalition and went door to door and identified the key targets and made it happen. And it's on the books today, making an impact here in Evanston and beyond. We need somebody who's got the ability and courage and coalition building instincts to make things happen in government. But there's another quality that, in my opinion, is just as essential, particularly in this moment. You know, we didn't talk about my family. My wife is a historian who studies authoritarians. So she's busy these days.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've learned from her is that the record on this is clear. We don't overturn authoritarian regimes like this just in government buildings. What's needed is a movement of people in the streets. What's needed is people willing to put their bodies on the line. What's needed is organizing more and more and more people to build a broad, national, visible resistance. And therefore, I think the next member of Congress in this district must be someone who understands organizing, who's prepared to put themselves on the line, and who knows how to build movements. And that's been my story as well. I said I started my career as a math professor, and now I do this. And the transition was as an organizer, getting people on yellow school buses to ride up to Wisconsin and knock on doors. I've been spending a lot of the time in the streets these last months, being tear gassed by ICE agents, standing face to face with Greg Bovino, who, thank God, has been demoted and apparently soon to be fired. There are other people in this race who might be able to argue they've got some experience getting things done in government. There are other people in this race who might be able to argue that they're in the streets and they know how to build movements to successfully win change. There is nobody else in this race who's doing both. And we need both. Jan Schakowsky has been both to an extraordinary extent. She's been a remarkable leader as a leader in the district, again, mobilizing people, organizing for change as a leader in the Capitol. I think that might be why she chose to endorse me in this race. And it's why I'm asking for everyone to support me, because in this moment, I don't think we can afford to compromise on either of those two core needs in what's required to have somebody ready to meet this moment in Congress.
Well, thank you very much to Daniel Biss for a wonderful conversation here. The values and the backbone and the courage and the fight that you bring are why J Street is with you in this race, and happy and proud to endorse you. And again, we encourage everybody watching to contribute to the campaign through J Street PAC's website, and to help Daniel in any way possible. Make sure you reach out to all of those Northwestern students. And when is the registration deadline? I think it's this weekend, right? You have to be registered by
There's also election day registration in Illinois. So
all right. So we'll just make sure that everybody, because like everybody I know seems to have a kid at Northwestern. It's make sure they're registering to vote in your district. And we are really, really going to be with you all these 48 days and through to November. And it is just wonderful to spend some time with you and get to know you better. And thank you for joining us here on Word on the Street. Any final words, Elon?
No, just thank you. Really great conversation. Very refreshing to have candidates like this running for U.S. Congress.
Yeah, we hope to have you soon in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you for your help. You're doing a lot to make it happen. I appreciate you very much.
Take care, everybody.